built of what we eat. And if we're eating crappy food that doesn't have the nutrients that we need and that's sprayed in a bunch of chemicals, then how do you expect your body to function? If a fish is swimming in a bowl and you spray a bunch of chemicals in there, you can give it as many medications as you want to give it. You can, do whatever you want to do to that fish. But if the environment that it's surrounded by has chemicals in it, it's going to die, right? It's not going to do well. And that's the same thing with us. We need the nutrients and we need a good environment. If we don't have it, then you can give that kid a million medications, and medications can be great and save your life. And that, I'm not against medications, but that's not the solution to the problem.
Welcome to the Soaring Child Podcast, where parents of children with ADHD learn tips and tricks to help their child soar at home, at school, and in life. We feature interviews with experts, medical professionals, and parents just like you who are learning how to reduce ADHD symptoms using food and other natural strategies. Because children with ADHD deserve to soar just like every other child. I'm your host, Dana Kay. Hello, parents. This is Dana Kay here with another edition of the Soaring Child Podcast. Now, the passion for children's health is shining through strong in this episode. If you want to do all you can to help your child thrive through life, then this episode is a must. My guest is a popular parenting Instagrammer. He's a board-certified pediatrician in Los Angeles, California, who specializes in parenting, wellness, and integrative medicine. He grew up in Toronto, Canada, and completed degrees in kinesiology, psychology, epidemiology, and community health before earning his medical degree from Thomas Jefferson Medical College. He completed his pediatric medicine training at Children's Hospital of Los Angeles and worked in private practice in Beverly Hills before founding his current practice, Integrative Pediatrics and Medicine, Studio City, in 2018. He has been featured in numerous documentaries, films, summits, podcasts, and articles including CBS, Fox, LA Parent, Mind Body Green, and many others. He's also the founder of the Parenting Masterclass series, which can be found at raisingamazingplus.com. He is the author of the children's book Love Dad, featuring multiple celebrities, which is currently in press with Penguin Publishing and set to release in 2024. Now it's time to welcome Dr. Joel Warsh to the Soaring Child. Hi, Joel. How are you? Thanks so much for joining us.
I'm great. It's always great to chat. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, definitely. I was just remembering back to the last time we saw each other was almost a year ago now. And yes, it was a year ago, wasn't it?
Yep.
But we've seen each other many times online and everything like that. And I really wanted to get you on today because you're a holistic pediatrician. And, I know we talk a lot about ADHD and natural things that our listeners can do to help reduce ADHD symptoms. Let's just have a general chat, about parenting in general and about, natural approaches to parenting. And so that's why I was so excited for you to come on today.
Yeah, I'm very excited to chat about that. And I think it's important to talk about because first of all, most of the stuff when it comes to foundations is relevant to everyone. It's relevant to adults, it's relevant to parents, it's relevant to kids with ADHD, it's relevant to other siblings that may or may not have ADHD. So these are things that anybody can do today to help with their overall health and well-being. And it's important because we don't focus on prevention. We really don't. We focus so much in modern medicine on treatment. And really one of my big missions and what I talk about on my Instagram a lot and online a lot is really to focus on those foundations of health, because we actually can do something about that, and they make more of a difference for most people than almost any treatment. It's really the thing that we can do and make small changes, but you get a big difference in the long run.
Yeah, I totally agree there. And, it's like everything that I do it doesn't matter if your kid's got ADHD or not. Really, these are the foundations of health. And so, as a holistic pediatrician yourself, what would you say are the core foundations that every family should be implementing?
So I like to call it the seeds of health. So that being S for stress, E for environment and toxins, other E for exercise, D diet, and final S would be sleep. So these are kind of the general foundations, things that you actually have some control over, things that we know with 100% certainty affect your immune system, affect your general health. And this is not rocket science. It's not rocket science that your diet affects your health, but we really don't focus on these things. We really forget about it all too often. But we need to come back to basics and just remember that we're literally built of what we eat. We're literally built of what we're exposed to, and all of those toxins, they can affect us. And you might not realize it in the short term, but over the long term, these are the things that really affect our health negatively. And we saw this during the pandemic, right? This really came out with comorbidities, and we saw what happened for individuals who had multiple comorbidities. They were much more at risk from COVID, but that's not new, right? That is true of every virus and probably true of every health condition, that everything that we're doing, all of our general health affects how we respond to whatever comes our way. And that's why it's so important to build a strong foundation and really have a robust immune system as much as possible, because we want to provide that buffer zone for our kids and for ourselves. So that way we don't fall off the cliff and run into an autoimmune condition, or get really sick when we do get exposed to a virus. I mean, these are things that we do have some control over. Yes, some people get really unlucky and they can be a marathon runner, the healthiest person in the world, and still get really sick. But by and large, the more healthy that you are, the less likely you are to suffer from some of these things. Or if you do have them, then maybe you can see some improvement in conditions. Just like with ADHD, there are a lot of patients that I take care of that have ADHD, autism, other behavioral concerns or learning concerns. And when we work on the basic foundations of cleaning up the diet or making sure they're getting more exercise or looking into their environment, some of those symptoms that families are already working on seem to get better. And it doesn't mean that just because you change your diet and maybe you take out gluten, you're going to not have ADHD anymore, right? That's not necessarily going to be the case, but it might improve their symptoms 5% or 3%. And that can be a huge difference for a child just from changing their diet, right? That's a huge thing that we actually have some control over.
Yeah. Oh, I love that analogy, seeds. I haven't heard that one before. And so I think that's a really, really easy way for families and parents to remember what are those core basics. We talk a lot about diet on this podcast. We talk about a lot about low inflammatory diets. I'd love to just actually talk a little bit with you about environmental toxins, because we've delved a little bit into it, but really haven't gone into it a lot. So what can families do to start reducing that exposure to environmental toxins? What are they, and what should families be on the lookout for?
Yeah, great question. And it's a big topic, right? I mean, and sometimes it can be overwhelming, and that's where I think it's important to start by remembering that there are some things we have some control over, and there are some things that we don't have a ton of control over when we're talking about things from like the macro level, right? So we're talking about societal, kind of issues. Yes, there are toxins in the air, right? There are toxins in the water, there are toxins in our food. We don't necessarily have a ton of control over all that. I mean, yes, we probably need to be lobbying a little bit more and getting into politics and doing all these things. But that's probably not what you're going to be doing at home today with your own family, right? But I think that's a bigger issue, and it's important, but not necessarily what you can actually do. So to me, when speaking about this to families, it's really to focus on those things where you do actually have some control over. So just really think about everything that you're exposed to and what you could do about that. So let's take air first, right? We're breathing all the time. So can you do anything to decrease the chemicals or toxins in your home in the air? Yeah, you can get a filter, right? You can get an air filtration system. You don't have to have that, but that's one way. You can maybe have that in your kid's room or something like that and clean the air just a little bit. There, you could get some plants, right? You can put more plants in your children's room, just like I'm seeing in your background there. You have some beautiful plants in the back, and things like aloe or philodendron or snake plants are known to clean the air, right? And so, is it going to change your air completely? No, there's still going to be pollution out in the air, right? But if you improve your air by 1%, great. That's one little thing that your body has to deal with a little bit less. The water, are you drinking tap water? Where do you live? If you live in Los Angeles, you probably shouldn't be drinking the tap water, right? There's not great tap water here. So do you have a filtration system on your water? Do you get bottled water? Do you get glass delivered, water to you delivered at home? Can you decrease the chemicals in there? Decrease the plastic that your water is touching. If you're getting plastic bottles, drink from a glass container. So those are, basic, simple things that you can do from that perspective. What are you touching? What are you putting on your kid's skin? Are they wearing makeup, or are they wearing, or are you spraying on sunscreen, or what is it that's touching their skin? And then what chemicals? Turn over a sunscreen and look at the ingredient label. Who knows what's in that stuff half the time, and do you need to be spraying that on your kid's skin all of the time, right? So these are things you just think about. And are there more natural options? Could you do just like a zinc oxide cream or something like that when you do sunscreen? So these are all the little decisions where once you start thinking with that mindset, then it's not here's what I do to get them healthy. It's here's how I think overall to move towards a more healthy direction, because every decision I make has some thought in it when it comes to what am I exposing my children to, and every little bit makes a difference. And everybody's genetics are different. Everybody can handle some level of chemicals and toxins, right? We have livers and kidneys and amazing machinery inside of us to handle some chemicals and toxins, but at some point it's too much, right? For everybody, at some point it's too much. The inflammation gets too high and you get sick. You get a virus, you get an autoimmune condition. It exacerbates underlying conditions. Maybe for some kids, learning disorders, they can't focus. All of those things can be exacerbated or even caused by toxins that you're exposed to. So just thinking about that is key. I mean, even sometimes, lead, you could have lead in your house, right? You could have lead in your paint, and that can cause all sorts of issues for kids. It could cause memory issues and learning issues and all sorts of things if you're exposed to it. But if you're not thinking about that, you're never going to find it, right? You're not going to necessarily just check for these kinds of things. So you just have to be thinking about it. And then if you, over the next 10 years, you start investigating and making little changes here and there, then symptoms are going to get better or go away, or maybe never exist in the first place, right? And that's what we want, because what we are seeing is the opposite. What we are seeing is chronic disease skyrocketing. 50% of kids or so have a chronic disease at this point. 70% of adults do. Most are on a medication, which is wild, right? That's crazy that we're seeing these numbers. and
the question is, why are they on the rise? And that is because there are, the food is covered in, glyphosate. We're getting exposed to all these toxins. It's all about those basics that you were mentioning. And, I think a really good tip for listeners out there is, especially with the water, I love that you brought that up. You can actually go to a website and check to see what is in your water in your area, because it is so different for so many different people. But, as a parent starting out, all of this can seem so overwhelming and so worrying. So what would you say to a parent just, learning all of this information? What's that piece of advice that you can give them about where do they start?
That is the number one question. I love that you brought that up, because when people hear about this, like, oh my God, I don't want to change everything that I eat, or I don't have the money to go buy this huge new filtration system for my house. But you don't have to, right? You don't have to do everything. Anything helps. So start anywhere. Make one little change the one thing that your kids are eating. Just the thought, just thinking about it changes the decisions that you're going to make when you're making new purchases in the future. Even if you're not going to throw away all the junk food in your house, let's say, maybe you don't buy it next time. Maybe when you're going to the store, you're like, okay, well, I'm thinking about their health, so let me just turn over the bag and read the label and see what's in this. Oh, this has got some crap in it I don't want. Well, I'm not going to buy that. I'm going to buy the other kind of chips that has better ingredients, right? Just start anywhere, make little changes. It's definitely not overwhelming. It can be overwhelming if you let it get overwhelming, but it's not overwhelming because there is nothing specific that you have to do. It's a thought process. It's a slow and gradual change, and it's a mindset of being aware that every decision that you make can affect your health, and therefore just making conscious decisions to buy things that are healthier, the best that you can. And that's where it's different for everybody, because let's say cooking food, right? Cooking food is super important in terms of our health, but maybe you're eating out all the time. So maybe you can cook one more meal per week, or maybe you're not buying organic. And so, okay, well, I can't afford to buy everything organic, or I don't want to buy everything organic, but I'll pick one or two foods and I'll buy those organic. Well, every little bit, every decrease of chemicals that they're exposed to can go a long way. And even just those small changes can really help. And you have to remember, again, we're built of what we eat. And if we're eating crappy food that doesn't have the nutrients that we need and that's sprayed in a bunch of chemicals, then how do you expect your body to function? If a fish is swimming in a bowl and you spray a bunch of chemicals in there, you can give it as many medications as you want to give it. You can, do whatever you want to do to that fish. But if the environment that it's surrounded by has chemicals in it, it's going to die, right? It's not going to do well. And that's the same thing with us. We need the nutrients and we need a good environment. If we don't have it, then you can give that kid a million medications, and medications can be great and save your life. And that, I'm not against medications, but that's not the solution to the problem long term. That's just a band-aid. You have to think about the environment and what we're doing and what we're being exposed to. And that is the reason why chronic disease is on the uptick. And we can change that trajectory by thinking in this other way.
Joel, I love your passion for this topic. You are, speaking to my heart, and I completely agree with you 100%. I love the analogy that you used about, spraying chemicals into a fish tank where a fish is, swimming around. Of course, that fish is not going to be really, really healthy. That's exactly how our bodies are. And, I'm going back to what you said about, prevention. So, what do you think is wrong with, I know a lot of, current parenting books these days are, not focusing on prevention, or, what's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's one of the biggest things that I think books in general, when it comes to parenting and pediatrics, gets wrong, especially medicine. Let's just start there because I think that's easier. Medicine is so focused on treatment, right? That's good. That's a good thing. We want to treat things, right? We want to have cures for cancer. We want to have antibiotics when you get really sick. That's great. And I'm not against that. And it can do wonders if you need it. But that's important in an acute setting or for some sort of very serious disease. But we need to be thinking about prevention. We got to be thinking about, how do we stop some of these things from ever occurring? How do we stop autoimmune disease from occurring in our kids 20 years from now? How do we think about things in a way where we can actually do something about it now to prevent? Because we can. And it's very, very simple if you think about it. Everything that we do affects our children. Everything we do affects us. And we have to go back. You have to go back even before your kids were born. Everything that you're doing, that's part of your body. That's going to affect your womb and your baby. All the things that you're consuming and exposed to when you are pregnant, that affects your baby. Everything that they're exposed to when they come out, that affects your baby. So we just have to start thinking in this way. And we can't just focus on treatment when it comes to medicine, when it comes to parenting books, when it comes to pediatric books, because they're great at like, okay, you have an ear infection, here's what you do. But how do we strengthen your immune system, or how do we create an environment where your immune system is strong so that way you don't even need the antibiotics because you don't get constant ear infections? Are there things that we can do? And the answer is yes. Most of the time there is. Certainly there are things that happen regardless of anything, right? But in general, yes, there are things that we can do from day one. And because of the way that medicine has evolved, where there's a lot of most of the research comes from pharmaceuticals, right? That's where the money comes from. So that's what the research is. And there isn't a lot of money in studying vitamin D or studying an apple, or things like that, right? There isn't a lot of money for studying preventative stuff. So the focus really has become treatment. And that's, again, it's good for those things, but we have to go back to basics and also spend just as much, if not more time on those basics and then discussing those basics, because it's way out of bounds right now about what you hear and what is talked about. And generally people don't focus on their health until they have a health problem, but that's too late. And we seeing the outcome of that kind of mentality and that philosophy because we have so much chronic disease now. Like it's happening. If you have two kids, one's gonna have a chronic disease. That's crazy. That's not okay. And I don't know when medicine is going to be like, hey, this is a problem. We need to do something about this. We need to spend a lot of our time and resources on this. But until that point, at least I'm trying to preach that message and trying to at least get parents to realize it, because that's where it's going to start. It's going to start from a grassroots movement of families who recognize that they want something different for their future. They don't want their kids to die earlier than we do. And this is the first generation where the life expectancy has gone down, right? And there are ways that we can change that, and it will come if enough people want it. And I think if enough people, I think if enough people push for it, then medicine will shift to also focusing on prevention, and that's what we have to do.
Joel, I mean, I'm so glad that you came on today. You're definitely preaching to the choir, and it has to start with us. It has to start with the parents listening that want to change. You know, it's like when my son was first diagnosed, he was on 3 meds and they wanted to give him a fourth, and that is not okay. And it requires people to speak up to say, you know, we've got to do better. You know, when I was able to reduce that toxic load on his body and fix up his diet and reduce toxin exposure, he came off all medications and he's thriving. He's in middle school and he hasn't needed meds since he was, you know, the age of 5.
Mm-hmm.
And so it is just so powerful. And, you know, parents, write down that basics that Dr. Joel, you know, shared with us. SEEDS. So can you just share that once again, what that SEEDS means, so they can write that down?
Sure. So stress, environment and toxins, exercise, diet, and sleep.
100%, the foundations. Now, you know, I want to go a little bit away from the foundations, and, you know, I want to talk about mental health. You know, mental health in this country, it's a pandemic, in my opinion. You know, it may not be called a pandemic, but in my opinion, it is. And, you know, why do you think that there is such a mental health sort of pandemic out there?
Yeah, and it's a big topic. First of all, I agree with you. I think the mental health is one of, if not the biggest issue at the moment. It was becoming a big issue in pediatric health before the pandemic. This is The pandemic
Hmm.
didn't start this. You know, there was a huge mental health crisis already occurring, but that was gasoline on a fire that exacerbated a problem that was already there and made it a million times worse. I mean, mental health visits went up, hospitalizations went up, suicides went up, stress and anxiety, you know, went through the roof. It was real bad for any of that. And I mean, it's not rocket science, I would say, as to why the pandemic made it worse in terms of isolation, not being able to be around your friends, the increased stress levels, worry about dying, worrying about, you know, family. All these things are obviously going to make you more stressed out. So that part, I would say, isn't surprising. I just think that it's something that needs a lot more attention and we need to do a lot about it. And I do think to some degree it has gotten more attention, which I think is good. But the bigger issue is what can we do about it, and why is it occurring? And I don't think anyone knows all of the reasons, but one of the big ones is just that there we have evolved so much more quickly. You know, society has evolved so much more quickly than we have as human beings, and we're really just not built for society as it is today. I mean, you think about how long genetics takes to change as human beings, but how much society has changed in terms of the technology that we have, the phones that we
Hmm.
have, the stresses that we have. We don't exactly know how to deal with all of these things. I mean, we have a innate system, a fight or flight system, how to deal with some acute stresses, but chronic stress we're not really built for. And life seems to have a lot more chronic stress, you know, these days, especially if you live in a city or you know, live around people or with schoolwork or all of these things where there's just a lot of pressures on teens and on kids that were never there before, not to mention the ability to know all of the horrible things going on in the world all the time through social media, which, you know, when we were growing up, it was like, okay, you can kind of know about stuff, but you watch the news or you see it once or twice a day and then you go about your day. But now you have a screen scrolling with like thousands of things, and if you don't curate your feed, then you can always be upset about something, you can always be anxious about something. And you know, teens and kids have a whole new world of stress that really is not great for them at all when it comes to social media. So I just think there's a lot of new pressures that we've never that are moving too fast that we're just not sure how to handle. And all of that is happening at a time where we're so mobile when it comes to the world, and yeah, we have all this great ability to connect through, you know, online and social media, but we don't have community like we used to have. And I think
No.
that's a huge part of the mental health crisis, is that, you know, we don't have grandparents around, and we don't have
Hmm.
family support necessarily, and we're not in villages and communities. And even people that, you know, they feel like, oh, they have a lot of following online or something like that, that gives you a lot of validation, but it's not like the real support that you really need right there. And I think that is an issue. I mean, when our grandparents, great parents were growing up, they were in a village. Their whole family was there for the most part, and they had a lot of support. We don't have that, and we have, you know, two parent working families and all sorts of things that just didn't exist 20, 50 years ago. So it's creating new pressures and new stresses that I don't think anybody has a great answer for at the moment, other than moving to the mountains or something.
Yeah,
I guess.
totally, which is not possible most of the time.
Yeah.
But, as a pediatrician, what suggestions would you make to families if they have children out there that are struggling with these mental health issues or concerns?
Yeah, well, number one is to admit it, right? I think if you recognize that there's something going on, then getting a team around you can be really helpful. There are great practitioners out there, therapists. I mean, that's where technology can be great too. Even if you're not right around a therapist, a lot of online therapy you can do these days just to work with somebody to talk through what's going on, talk through your stresses, because you go to school, right, and you learn how to do math and but nobody teaches you how to deal with stress, right? And
No.
there's no education in this, and so that's where a really good pairing between a child and a therapist, or an adult and a therapist, that can work on coping strategies to identify this is going on, and here's how you're reacting to it, and here's a different way that maybe you can react to it, or to help put things in perspective. Because I think parents can be helpful certainly in this, but like a teenager, they're not necessarily wanting to listen to their parent or talk to their parent, or maybe their parent is their stress. Right. So I think that having an unbiased kind of third party can be really helpful in those situations, just to help them navigate the water. So getting a trained professional, if it's serious enough, is really, really, really helpful. And the foundations are always helpful too. I mean, again, just what can you do to decrease their stress? If you think in that way, then there are things that you can do to decrease their stress. So you can make sure they're getting all the nutrients that they need. Your body is stressed out if it doesn't have what it needs. So it's like magnesium is really calming. Some people can do like Epsom salt baths or magnesium. You can drink chamomile tea. You can have time in the bath where you have a calm spaces. You can do social media holidays. You can do those kinds of things where it's going to be tough to like take your kid's phone away, maybe, but you could do that, I guess. But they'll probably be pretty mad at you. But you can implement, okay, well, we're going to not have phones in our room at night, and so you're not going to touch your screen after 8 o'clock or 9 o'clock or whatever. And we're going to have some holidays during the day. When we have dinner time for 45 minutes, there's no phones. They can't be at the table. Don't touch it. Put it over here. When you go to bed, it's going to be outside of the room. Like, those are things that you can do. And maybe if you give them an extra 2 or 3 hours a day where they're not stressed about their phone, that helps them. They're and everybody's different. Every family is different. But these are just like little things where you have to figure out what makes sense for you. But you can do these kind of things.
Yeah, no, look, I love all of those tips. We definitely do that in our house. My son's, just about to turn 13, or my older one, and he just got his first phone. I held off as long as I could, but he was like the last kid on the bus without the phone. And he does not have his phone in his room. When he goes to bed at night, it comes into our room at 8 o'clock. We don't have it at dinner time. And we're actually going through a media break, as we call it right now. When they get home from school, they're not allowed to go onto their devices at all for the next week. And it's actually really interesting to watch, because at first, they're like all dysregulated, but after a day or two, they will go and find things to do. They'll go out and play in the neighborhood. They'll go and read a book. But for the first part of it, they really struggle with coming up with something to do. But when they get in the swing of it, it's actually not that hard. So I completely agree with everything that you're sharing here. Jill, where does your passion come from? Where does this holistic view that you've got for parenting and for children's health come from? Because obviously you went to traditional medical school, and you probably did one nutrition subject in your whole degree, and you probably were taught medicine in prescribing medication to treat a disorder. So where does this come from?
So it's a mixture of a few things. I think a lot of people, when they get into natural medicine, it's like some sort of health thing or family health thing that kind of pushes them, which wasn't really true for me. For me, it was more, one, meeting my now wife. She's very holistic minded, so just seeing and learning from her has been one certain influence. But then it's also just seeing patients going through the regular system and not getting better, and then or families or friends, and going to like some natural practitioner, and then they come back and they're better. And they've been in the medical system for 5 years with whatever autoimmune condition, and they go to a naturopathic doctor, and then their symptoms resolve in like 2 weeks. And you're like, what? What's going, and that just kept happening. And I'm like, what is going on here? What am I missing? And so I just started learning about natural medicine. There's no, magic to it. It's just learning more and then just gaining a passion, because going through functional medicine and other training, it's like, why aren't we thinking like this? Like, it's not anything that's outside of common sense. Like, there's no logical reason not to think about prevention, and there's no logical reason to not think about the root cause of illness. It's difficult in modern medicine because of the way the system is set up.
Yeah.
But every doctor pretty much goes into medicine to help people, right? It's not like they go into to be evil people, especially when it comes to pediatricians. But there is a system that's in place that's really difficult to think in this way, because talking about prevention, I mean, think about how long we've been talking already just about very, very basic stuff. For a family, like, you don't have an hour with a patient, right? You can't spend 20 minutes talking about diet and 10 minutes talking about exercise. They just don't have the time. Even in my practice, where I'm private practice, you still, 20, 30 minutes, whatever it is. It's not enough time to really dive deep. So to me, it's just really getting on, being here, doing this. I'm building my masterclass website to try to get this information out, because you need more time. The passion comes from the realization that the system is not going to fix the problem, not in the short term. Absolutely. So it has to be us. And I have a child, and I know that it's my job to do whatever I can to keep him healthy. And parents have to realize that it's not like an extra stress I'm trying to throw on people. It's just the reality. You have to be their advocate. The system's not gonna, just like you talked about, like, for your kids, it's like, they're not gonna be there every day. I don't care how good your doctor is. I mean, unless you're like a multi-billionaire and you can have a doctor in your home every day, which is probably not true for everybody, then they're not going to be there to choose the food. They're not going to be there to do the grocery shopping. They're not going to be there during those stressful situations. So it is on you to have that mindset for their future health. That's just the way that it is. And so my passion comes from the fact that hopefully people can internalize that a little bit and take that in, that they do have a lot of power on their family's health. And it because you've seen it personally, but things can change. Diagnoses which medical system thinks that are going to be lifelong are not necessarily going to be lifelong, and something that quote unquote needs a medication doesn't necessarily need medication. Sometimes it does, and sometimes medication can help. But even if you need a medication for something like ADHD, then are there things that you can do for that child to get them off the medication, to decrease their dose over the long run? Not necessarily tomorrow, but a medication is not an ideal solution to a problem. It might be the ideal solution in the short term because they might really, really need it. And that's totally fine. There are kids that absolutely need medication, and that makes a huge help for them. So it's not to say that you should never use it. But if your child has ADHD, which a lot of this community, I imagine, does, since that's what the podcast is, then, I would say to those parents, what can you do for 5 years from now, or 10 years from now, or a year from now, to decrease their medication if they're on it, or help them to get rid of it? Are there things that you can think about or start to work on, or start to just ponder as the day goes on? Like, is something that I'm doing contributing to this? Is something that they're doing contributing to this? Are there 30 things that I could do to make small improvements? And if I do all of those things, will their symptoms get better? Because the answer is maybe. Maybe. Not yes, not no. Some kids no, right? Or some kids, it might be 300 things you got to change before you get there. But are there some things that you can do differently that maybe we're contributing to this a little bit, or maybe we have contributed to a little bit, and maybe there are some things we can contribute to turn in a different direction? Maybe, right? And that's what I think is a reasonable question to ask yourself as a parent.
Oh, I think that's a wonderful question to ask yourself as a parent. But there are not many doctors out there telling parents to ask that question. And, I go back to the fact that you said, there's a fundamental issue with the industry. And I completely agree with you there. And I don't normally talk about this, I try not to get political. This is not political, but it's more that, and I like to kind of compare it to the Australian medical system. In Australia, we have public health, and everyone gets public health. And so they want healthy people. They don't want sick people. Whereas here, the industry is really driven by the pharmaceutical companies and the insurance companies. And so, when there's healthy people, there are not need for pharmaceutical medication and there's not need for insurance. And so until we can change that model, I don't think it's going to be front and center. So parents out there need to ask themselves, what are those little changes that I can make that can help my child thrive? Will it be that one thing? It won't be the only thing. No, it's all about getting those right ingredients for that child, and every child is so different. I'm interested to hear a little bit about what you mentioned in your masterclass website. It's about that education. It's about educating us as parents. Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
Yeah. So raisingamazingplus.com, that's the website, and it's basically like a masterclass.com but for parenting. And my goal with that is to speak to the best practitioners out there, on all the different fields. And we started with a post-pandemic parenting course, just talking about differences in parenting after the pandemic. We've done newborn courses, and we're gonna keep doing more stuff. But it's basically just to go through and talk about different topics and what's important to people, what's current and relevant, and spend the time having a full discussion that you can't otherwise get at your doctor. I mean, you just can't. Like, I don't care what's you talk about Australia, and I grew up in Canada, so I get that. But I mean, when you go to like a system like that, then you're not going to have more than 5 minutes with the doctor. It's just not. There's just no way, as the system is set up at this time, that you're going to have the time that you need to learn what you need to learn, or to discuss what you need to discuss, to really work on optimal health. It's personal learning that families have to do. It's knowledge that we all just need to gain through hearing about it, learning about it, being important enough to us to start doing it. And that's what's going to change the industry, because it's not going to change on its own. Pharmaceuticals make way too much money, and they're going to keep promoting what's going to make them money. So, and that's not their fault, right? That's what they do. But that is just what the system is. So we just have to be mindful of that, and be mindful that we have the majority of the power over our families. We have a lot of control over what they're exposed to and what they eat. Not total control, but we can control what we can control. And I think if most people are cognizant of that and are mindful of that from day one, then we're going to see a much healthier population long term in the future. But that's not happening right now. It's definitely not happening right now. I mean, we're less and less healthy every year. Autism rates went up a huge amount since the last time. Obesity is almost at like 50%. Diabetes doubled in the last couple of years. Our health is bad overall, and we need a wake up call. And I'm not sure what it's going to take to get there, but when we're talking about health, it's ADHD is just one small part of that, and some of it I think is related to what we're talking about. Some of it probably isn't. Some of it can be neurochemical, and I think there's a lot of reasons, I think, at the end of the day. But when it comes to your group of people that are listening to this, and the amazing families that have kids with that they're working on ADHD and things like that, there are things that you can do. I've seen it many times. It happened to you, and that's just what I think is just so important to remember, is it's not hopeless. It's not hopeless. It's not. There's not a specific pathway, because every child is different, but you do have some power here. And there are things that you can do, and maybe, just maybe, in a few years you can get your kids off their medicine and they can function amazingly without it. Or maybe they just need it when they need it, and not every day. And if you have a kid that has 10 milligrams of whatever and you can get them on 5 milligrams, great. That's going to be better for their system, and better for their kidneys, and better for their liver. If you're taking a medication for 10, 15 years, that can cause side effects, right? I mean, it can cause if you take it one time, but you can certainly assume that if you're taking something for years, it's going to increase your risk. So let's do whatever we can to get them off those medicines, or to decrease it, and still have them functioning at the same level. And that's, I think, what the goal should be for medicine. It's not exactly right now. It's not, the goal is to kind of get you out of the office happy and get your kid functioning. But it's not, can we get our kid functioning optimally with the most minimal medicine possible? It's not exactly how we think right now, but I think that's the way we should think. And I hope that's the way we think in 20 or 30 years. It's just a minor change, but it's a big change.
Yeah, and look, I think that's the perfect note to finish up on, because let's do whatever we can. The goal for us is to help our children thrive, and doing that on the least possible medicine as possible. And every child is different. We can control what we can control, as you said, and we have most of the power. So we need to educate ourselves. Joel, what a wonderful chat I've had with you today. Thank you so much for joining us and sharing your passion. Your passion is shining through, your knowledge, your experience with all of our listeners. Please tell listeners where they can find and follow you online.
Sure. So the two big places would be on Instagram, Dr. Joel Gator, and then raisingamazingplus.com. The two best places to join me, and feel free to reach out if you have questions.
Fantastic, Joel. I have to say that I do like following your Instagram. He's got a very decent sized following, and he is really great on that platform. So go and check it out. Thank you once again for joining me today. And listeners, thank you for tuning into this week's episode of The Soaring Child. I'm Dana Kay, your ADHD health practitioner. Keep on thriving. Thank you for listening to the Soaring Child podcast today. To learn more about how to help your child with ADHD soar using natural strategies, visit our website at ADHDthriveinstitute.com and follow us on social media at ADHD Thrive Institute.